Everybody sing that shit.
So, episode 4 of the Breakdown podcast, and today we're joined by James Moore, husband, father, podcast producer, and campaigner in the field of withdrawing from antidepressants. And it's welcome to the podcast.
Well, Billy, thank you so much. And before we go any farther, I just want to say, how much admiration I've got for everything you've done for the community of people struggling with anxiety. I think Anxiety United is brilliant, and community building like that is really, really powerful. So you've done such a great job. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We've been talking for quite a while. I've mentioned podcast to you so many times, but it's never actually come to fruition. So it's good to actually see you. I watched something off your website, which is letstalkwithdrawal.com, for anybody that wants to look. I seen your interview with Victoria Derbyshire on there.
Yeah,
that was pretty good. So go on, tell us a bit about yourself, your history, and let's go from there.
Great. So like many people, I am an anxiety sufferer myself. Struggled with that for really as long as I can remember. And but it was kind of in 2011 that things started to get very difficult for me. So.
Okay.
I was working in the civil service at the time. I'd recently become a new father, and pressures started to creep up on me, and I started to experience regular panic attacks at work. Sometimes many a day. I'd be sitting in meetings and overcome with a desire to flee from the room, and of course, like most people, I was desperate to hide it. So I spent all this time and energy trying to suppress what I was feeling. And part of my anxiety specifically is what's called emetophobia. So I have an intense fear of
being
sickness.
sick.
Yeah, and it's a lot of people struggle with it, and it can affect every single part of your life. And it was near Christmas 2011, and there was a sickness bug at work, and I remember sitting there, at work, kind of, just out of all control, panic overwhelming me, and I just thought I just can't do this anymore. So I left my desk, left all my stuff there, went outside the building and called my wife, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. Can you come and pick me up? So she came and got me, and then, like many people, I went to the doctor, and the doctor signed me off work for a bit and referred me to a psychiatrist then. So I went to see a psychiatrist, and they said, well, you've got a chemical imbalance in your brain.
I read that part on your website.
Yeah,
we're going to have to go there. We're going to have to go there.
Yeah, we will. So, and of course, at the time, I didn't know any better. So, she said, look, I'll prescribe you these antidepressants. So it was Mirtazapine that I took. And, she said they can help people. And, also, Billy, before we go on, I know that medication is a really sensitive and difficult area for some people, and I'm certainly not giving any medical advice here, just relating my own experience. But I came to find out that antidepressants can help some people, but they can also cause dreadful problems for other people too. And I'm keen that both sides of that get discussed, really. So I took the antidepressant for a while, and it did help me sleep. It was which was a bit of a relief. It was a strong sedative, so it knocked me out like a light. Like turning off a light at the end of the day. But then the next day I was hungover. I felt detached and not really present. And so I've heard other people say that the antidepressant I took, it took the edge off some of the bad things, but it took the edge off a lot of the good things too.
I've heard that.
I couldn't smile at things that my daughter was doing, and I that started to worry me. So after a few weeks, I went back to the psychiatrist and said, look, I don't really feel any less anxious. All I do now is feel muddy and indistinct and not clear. And I remember her saying, look, James, if you come off the tablets now, what we don't have anything else for you. You're just going to be back where you were. So I kind of, took that as a sign that I'd be on the drugs for a long time, maybe even for life.
Yeah.
And then I really struggled with them. I took them for 2 years, and during that time, I desperately tried to get back to work. So I had many, gradual reintroductions back into work, but every time the same thing happened. The anxiety pretty quickly became overwhelming.
Yeah.
Of course, because, being a bit dumb, I was trying to do the same thing in the same way and expecting a different result. Yeah, and it didn't work. Obviously, I just kept getting into the same problems. So I was made redundant, unfortunately, at the end of 2013 on ill health grounds. And, that was one of the lowest points of my life. You know, I'd lost my 20-year career. I'd got a wife and a daughter to try and provide for, and you know, we had to sell the house and move, and you know, I was really no closer to kind of getting to these issues. And
Stress
then
on
kind of,
top of stress.
yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. And so then at the kind of 2 years into treatment with the antidepressant, you know, I remember saying to my wife, look, you know, I need to come off these things. So being a cautious sort and having anxiety about this kind of thing anyway, I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, it's fine, just take half a tablet for a week and then come off.
Hmm.
And so, of course, you know, trusted them. That's what I did. And that experience of trying to come off that way was really viciously unpleasant, far
Yeah.
worse than anything I'd been through before, far
Yeah.
worse
Yeah.
than the panic attacks, far worse actually than losing my job and all that stuff. You know, I you know, felt dizzy, felt sick, just anxiety like I'd never experienced. And really, I really thought I was either seriously ill or losing my mind,
Hmm.
or both at the same time. So the only thing I could think to do was to take a tablet and, you know, to try and at least get some sleep or whatever. And of
Yeah.
course, as soon as I took a tablet, those problems vanished almost immediately.
Right.
So then a light bulb went on, and I thought, "Oh, okay, maybe this is coming off the drugs too fast."
Mm.
So I went back to the doctor, related this experience, and they said, "Oh no, that's not possible. That's not how these drugs work. You must be wrong." And I remember leaving the doctor's surgery and thinking, oh, actually, I
Yeah.
don't think that's right,
Mm.
because some of the things I've been experiencing, like intense headaches, blurred vision, you know, they were not things I'd ever had
Yeah.
before as part of my anxiety, you know.
Mm.
So I was pretty clear it wasn't a relapse, that it was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
effect of coming off the drugs. So I wanted to find out more about this. Of course, you know, like most people, I went onto iTunes or whatever and tried to
Yeah.
search for interviews, couldn't find anything at all.
Okay.
Very little information out there, you know, officially about coming off the drugs.
Mm.
So that in 2017, that led me to start my own podcast called Let's Talk Withdrawal,
Yeah.
you mentioned at the start. And the aim of that really was twofold. I mean, personally, you know, to help me, because
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
was struggling, you know, felt isolated, you know, I'd got all these anxiety issues, but then on top
Yeah.
of that, I'd also got worries about, are the drugs safe to be on long term, and will I ever get off them, and you know, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So I interviewed people like me who'd experienced coming off, but I also interviewed some uh, you know, scientists and experts and psychiatrists, psychologists
Yeah.
who had knowledge themselves of helping people come off. And you know, that was a real eye opener for me,
Hmm.
a real eye opener. You know, and the kind of, I came to see that there's this huge community of people out there who really have not had their voices heard. You know,
Yeah.
people that have
Okay.
really struggled to kind of come off the drugs, and you know, in a sensible way.
Mm. Because we always think
So
we think we're so alone in these situations, don't we? When you look for it, it's there.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely, absolutely. And there were very similar experiences being shared online of people saying, well, my doctor told me to come off very quickly. I did
Yeah.
that. I was in a hellish place, more ill than I'd ever been. Went back to the doctor and they said it's relapse, not withdrawal.
Okay.
So, you know, that hearing all these experiences, of course, you know, my heart went out to people, because these are people already suffering
Yeah.
depression,
Yeah. Yeah.
anxiety, OCD, you know, emetophobia, whatever else it might be. And now on top of that, they've got to try and navigate this
Yeah.
difficult process
It's
of
almost like
withdrawal. Yeah,
you
with
have
doctors saying,
you have the pill which gives you a bit of respite, maybe,
yeah, yeah,
although it's not always positive. But then when you
yeah.
come off, you've got to go back through it. So what's the point in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know, again, this is just my personal experience. You know, I know some people find the drugs beneficial in terms of
Yeah.
treating symptoms, but you know, one of the ironic things for me was that one of the worst symptoms of coming off was increased anxiety,
Yeah.
which of course
Yeah.
is the last thing I wanted. You know, I'd
Yeah.
spent the last 2 years trying to get some distance from it, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's completely back in my face again. And you know, to kind of cut a long story short, eventually I did get off the drugs. I did that 5 months ago,
Yeah.
but I tried 3 times to come off, and each time was really intensely difficult. And so I had to go incredibly slowly. So
Mm.
I'd taken the drugs for 5 years, and it took me another 2.5 years to get off them,
Really.
a bit at a time. And
Yeah.
that, you know, that process was really agonizing. You know, it was difficult all the way through.
Mm.
And one of the things that I wanted to do was, you know, in the midst of all this hell, I thought, we have to make it easier for people,
Yeah.
to get off, because if you do want to come off, you really don't have many options. And to be fair, doctors don't have many options that they can give you either. So
Yeah.
some people kind of cut their tablets or crush them, which is really inaccurate, as you
Mm.
might,
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
might
Of course.
imagine. Some people can use liquid versions, and I used the liquid version for a good part of my taper, but liquid versions are very expensive. So,
Okay.
mine was 80 quid a bottle each time.
Blimey.
And so it took me quite some time to convince the doctor that I needed it,
Mm.
and it did allow me to taper slowly, but it was not easy to get. So I thought there must be an easier way to do this.
Hmm.
Why can't we just prepare a whole load of very small dosage tablets for people to use to come off?
Yeah.
And so in 2016, I started a petition which called for something I called tapering kits.
Hmm.
And I kind of envisaged, a bunch of tablets that gradually reduced in dose, but were made by perhaps the pharmaceutical manufacturers, or,
Yeah.
or whatever else it might be. And that petition, started to get ahead of steam, and it's now got 13,500 signatures from people
Okay.
all over the world.
We'll put a link
And
in the description.
great, thank you. And it was really interesting to see that this wasn't just a problem in the UK. That actually
Yeah.
people from all over the place were saying, "Oh yes, I've had exactly this, and I don't get any support from my doctor. I don't really know where to turn." And then in March 2017, the most amazing kind of coincidence happened. I got an email from a Dutch research scientist called
Yeah.
Dr. Peter Groot, and it turned out that Dr. Peter Groot himself had taken the antidepressant venlafaxine, actually for depression rather than anxiety.
Okay.
And he noticed that even if he missed a single dose, he felt really unwell.
Mm.
And then when he took his next dose, he felt back to normal. So he set about creating exactly what my petition was calling for.
Right. Okay.
So he created these things called tapering strips, and he worked with a not-for-profit pharmacy in the Netherlands to
Hmm.
create these things. And you know, like most good ideas, they're really simple. They
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
very small dosage tablets combined, a bit like the way you'd use change in your pocket to make any amount of money.
Yeah.
They use a number of small, tablets to kind of make any dosage possible. And then, as you kind of take each daily allocation of these
Hmm.
tablets, you gradually decrease. And I've got one here to show you, if it's all right, because
Show.
they're quite different to how we normally see our tablets. So rather than kind of, it is actually a strip. You
Yeah.
can see that this is 28 days worth.
Okay.
And then you've got a pouch each day. And so what you do is you take each daily allocation, the number of pills in each pouch.
Yeah.
And as you take each daily allocation, your dosage gradually and very precisely reduces.
Yeah.
So, this is actually a placebo one, but, this might be, for example, 20 milligrams of citalopram,
Hmm.
and this might go from 20 milligrams to 15 milligrams over 28 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's totally accurate.
Mm.
And one of the
So,
nice things.
are they
Go on, Billy.
Are they labelled with the dosages, or is it like?
Yes, they are. Yeah. So on every individual pouch, it tells you exactly what tablets are in and the dosage.
Yeah.
So, you can track it accurately if you
Yeah.
want. You can say, well, I've come down by 0.5 milligrams today, and then in 3 days' time, there's another 0.5 milligram reduction, and then so on. So it's not a reduction every day. It's a reduction every few days.
I wonder how successful it would be if you didn't put the dosage on there, and just drop it gradually with the placebo in mind.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure that a lot of people don't actually look at the doses.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Interesting.
the funny thing is that I did most of my taper using liquid.
Yeah.
And then it's very important for people when they get to the very last bit of their taper. The last bit of the taper is the most difficult. People
Yeah.
often report,
Yeah.
coming off the very last bit, because antidepressants are quite strange. They don't affect your neurotransmitters in the same way.
Mm.
All the way up the dosage, if you like. The first few milligrams has the greatest effect.
Okay.
So, of course, naturally, when you come off those first few milligrams,
The last few. Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
that's when it gets hardest. So Peter Groot kindly, I ordered tapering strips to come off the last part of my Mirtazapine, and I got the last 28-day one, and I sat there with my wife, and I held up the last one in the strip, and I said, all being well, this will be the last Mirtazapine I ever take. And that was really liberating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for the longest time, Billy, I thought I'd be on them for life.
Yeah.
I really had internalized this. I will never get off. It's too difficult, because not only is it physically unpleasant, it's a psychological hurdle too.
Yeah,
You
of
don't
course.
want to feel that way, so you resist having to reduce and you put it off and whatever. But tapering strips for me took much of the anxiety out of the process.
Hmm.
I could just open each daily pouch, take the tablets. Quite often, I wouldn't even look at when I was making a reduction. I'd
Yeah,
just let it carry on.
yeah,
And honestly, Billy, if it weren't for tapering strips, I don't think I would have got off
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
I think I would have been stuck at a very, very low level. And so, tapering strips, I mean, they won't work for everyone. And, it's fair to say there are some people out there who can stop relatively
yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
I have to say it's never advisable,
Mm,
so I really would caution people out there that if they are thinking about stopping psychiatric drugs of any kind, antidepressants, antipsychotics,
hmm.
benzodiazepines, it's really important to try and come off as slowly as you can, because it can be really destabilizing to come off quickly.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it can bring your anxiety back tenfold, and it can threaten your ability to go to work and all that kind of stuff. So I really think people should be cautious. um, and there are some people that can stop relatively quickly, particularly if they've been on low doses or if they haven't been on the drugs very
I
long.
was going to say, yeah, perhaps the duration. Mm.
Absolutely, yeah. Duration and dosage is definitely related to it. So if you've been on a few months at a low dosage, then you can stop probably more easily than somebody that's been on for decades at very high
Yeah,
doses. But I have to say, I've talked to people who have been on these drugs for decades at quite high doses, and they have tapered over a long period of time, but they have got off successfully.
yeah,
But we also need to recognize that unfortunately there are a very small group of people
hmm,
who will try multiple times but find it so difficult they'll just say, well, I'm just going to stay with the drugs,
yeah, yeah.
or who come off slowly and are left with effects afterwards.
What would be the doctor's advice for the symptoms of withdrawal? Is it just to just accept those symptoms?
Well, yeah, doctors' advice on this, I have to say that it's not fair to bash doctors, because
Yeah, yeah, of course.
you've only got to look at what's going on now to see
Uh,
how much pressure they're under.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
you know, the fact is that this whole issue of withdrawal has been really not properly discussed in the medical world for a very long time.
Mm,
And the drugs, antidepressants particularly, became very popular in the 1980s. So the pharmaceutical manufacturers have known about withdrawal from antidepressants for a long time,
yeah.
but they realized that if people knew the drugs created dependence and people found them difficult to stop, they realized that the market for them wouldn't be so big.
Hmm.
So actually, the pharmaceutical manufacturers conspired to create this term called discontinuation.
I've read that.
Yeah, and people will go to their doctor and they'll say, are these drugs addictive? And the doctor will say, no, they're not. We use this term discontinuation syndrome.
Hmm.
Now, I have to say, no one outside of medical circles uses that term.
Yeah.
And, you know, as to whether antidepressants, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics are addictive, they're not addictive in the classic sense, but they
Hmm.
do create dependence. And the two are related, but ever so slightly different. So
Yeah.
if someone's addicted, then the definition of that is they might engage in pleasure seeking behavior, or they might need more of whatever it is they're taking to
Hmm.
achieve the
Hmm.
same effect, or they might feel compelled to take it but not for medical reasons, for other reasons.
Hmm.
But it is possible to be dependent on a psychiatric drug without feeling, because I've never heard anybody say they get a euphoric feeling
No.
from taking an antidepressant. They're
Mm.
taking it to try and avoid the worst crap that's happening in their
Yeah, yeah, of
lives, which
course,
is
of course.
totally understandable. But so they're dependent because when they come to stop, they suffer with withdrawal symptoms. So it's not a craving,
Hmm.
or it's not a pleasure seeking thing. So they're not addictive, but they do create dependence.
Yeah.
And doctors, when you go to your doctor and you say, look, I'm struggling, then quite often they'll say, well, I haven't really seen this before.
Hmm.
Withdrawal. Most of my patients seem to get off no problem. But what they tend to do is, if someone like me goes to them and says I've had this problem coming off, they'll say, well, it's relapse, and they'll put people back on the drugs,
Yeah, yeah.
or they'll add an antipsychotic to an antidepressant, or they'll
Hmm.
add a benzodiazepine.
Hmm.
Sometimes, if someone is determined to come off, sometimes doctors will recommend a benzodiazepine short term to try and dampen down some of the anxiety response.
Hmm.
But again, I can only speak of my own experience. I took Valium on 2 occasions, and it made me feel awful. It
Yeah.
didn't really help, because this kind of chemical stuff happening in my body. I was just adding more to the cocktail.
Yeah, yeah, of
You
course.
know, so I kind of decided to get engaged in podcasting, and try and do a little bit of exercise and try and eat a bit better,
Hmm.
and things which don't sound as powerful medically, but you know I I haven't personally seen much evidence for using psychiatric drugs to treat withdrawal caused by
Yeah,
coming off the
yeah,
drugs.
yeah, yeah.
Now again, it's a very personal choice. Some people do get so distressed by it they might need some pharmaceutical help.
Hmm.
But what I've seen people relate is that they try and tough it out as much as possible by going as slowly as possible, and they just kind of accept that they're going to go through a very difficult
Mm.
time. So it's not uncommon to go to your doctor and say, I'm struggling with withdrawal, and they'll say either, or there's no such thing, or well, just go back on the tablet,
Hmm.
because you've got this chemical imbalance that we need to address.
Yeah.
Or that, oh well, we could try a different antidepressant, or we could give you a benzodiazepine, or but for people out there who might be struggling with it, try all the alternatives available.
Mm.
Try
Mm.
acupuncture, try talking therapy, try diet, exercise. Something will work.
I was going to say,
Some
yeah, because perhaps because I know in my history, when I've been to the doctors and been offered antidepressants, they've never told me about the possible withdrawals or discontinuation issues. Like they never mention that. They only talk about how it's going to help you. So perhaps if they were a bit more honest about that, people could make the smart decision. It's
yeah,
up to them if they feel that they're prepared, or if they're that bad that they feel they need something,
yeah,
then yeah, it's worth it. But if you want to go through all this again 12 months down the line,
yeah.
think. Mm,
Yeah, I agree. I agree so much, Billy. Informed consent is really important.
yeah.
And I'm sure that doctors, again, are worried that if they tell us what might be ahead of us, that might make us think twice about the drugs. But it's our decision.
Yeah, yeah,
We
of
are the
course.
ones,
Mm,
who are, and we have to be given all the information to make that choice. I certainly wasn't.
mm-hmm,
Many people I've spoken to relate that they weren't, exactly as you said. The doctor only tells you about, look, it might take 6 weeks to work,
mm,
and this might prepare you for talking therapy, while we wait for that, and all those kind of things. But they do need to be more honest that for a
mm,
group of people, probably around 50%, we don't know exactly, but surveys are showing around 50% of people will struggle coming off the drugs.
yeah.
That is something that we need to know. And also, Billy, you mentioned the infamous chemical imbalance earlier, and
Come on,
I you
let's
know
go there.
I yeah, I hope that people out there by now realize that the chemical imbalance was no more than a theory made by the pharmaceutical manufacturers to try and explain how antidepressants might work.
Mm,
So the theory was that serotonin or other neurotransmitters in your brain were not active for long enough in the
mm-hmm,
neurons of your brain, and that might be responsible for low mood. But there is no test for levels of serotonin in anyone's brain.
mm-hmm,
There is no way, levels of serotonin in the person's brain change all the time naturally anyway. So the idea that you can somehow normalize them by using a drug that
yeah,
gums up the working of them, it's just, and I implore people, if they've never heard this before, to just look online. There are plenty of resources
yeah.
there. So last year, 2019, there was a Twitter Q&A with the Royal College of Psychiatrists,
Mm-hmm,
and called AD's Mythbuster. That was the hashtag. And someone asked the question, they were a therapist, and they said, my clients come to me and say, well, I take antidepressants because I've got a chemical imbalance. Is this true?
mm-hmm.
And the Royal College of Psychiatrists said, this is a gross oversimplification, and we no longer support that view. And that was
Okay.
their official spokesman. So
Yeah.
the UK Royal College of Psychiatrists has said the chemical imbalance is a far too simplified concept to be of any
Mm-hmm,
use.
mm-hmm,
So, and the worry is, of course, that if doctors have told people like me that my brain is different or broken, or, not producing enough neurotransmitters, or whatever else it might do,
mm-hmm.
that might make me feel really disempowered.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
it's a
definitely.
disease, I can't do anything
Yeah.
about it.
Mm,
But actually saying to someone, there isn't anything wrong with your brain,
mm-hmm,
there is no difference between your brain and other people who aren't struggling. The difference is that for you, anxiety is a challenge, but the anxiety is trying to keep us safe.
Mm-hmm.
It's over responding and oversensitive to what is really a difficult and sometimes dangerous world.
Yep.
You've only got to look now at the news with coronavirus, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure many people out there are terrified. I'm worried about it, my family's worried about it. That's not mental illness.
Yeah,
That's a sensible reaction
it's
to
normal.
very difficult circumstances.
Mm. So where are you now in your journey? Like, you came off the antidepressants. Did things go well from there, or do you still have challenges?
Yeah, I am still struggling, mostly with lack of sleep, actually.
Okay.
So, Mirtazapine is unusual, and it's a really heavy sedative.
Okay.
So, the first night I took one, I took my first ever Mirtazapine. Of course, I was really anxious about that because I was anxious about everything.
Yeah.
I took my first one, and 20 minutes later, my wife had to help me up the stairs to bed. I mean, it
Right.
literally felt like
Blimey.
I'd been
Yeah.
tranquilized. But it was a relief to get some sleep.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't feel like refreshing sleep. So what tends to happen with withdrawal is whatever effects the drugs have on you tend to go much more in reverse the other
Mm-hmm.
way. So if you take a sleeping tablet, then when you come off it, you find it very difficult to sleep at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm 5 months off now. I'm getting 2 to 3 hours sleep a night, which is pretty
Really.
tough.
Yeah.
I kind of manage that by listening to a lot of podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
So as just to try and not get anxious about, because quite often you'll lie there and you'll get annoyed with yourself that you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
sleep, and then
Definitely.
that'll make
Yeah.
the sleep worse. So
Mm-hmm.
I try and tell myself that even lying there, relaxing, listening to a podcast is still rest of
Resting.
sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Makes sense.
yeah, and that does help. And I am fortunate. I do work from home. So I don't have to drive hundreds of miles and back to work each day. So
Mm-hmm.
at least that's lucky for me. But I'm really glad I'm off. I'm really glad that I don't feel even just the freedom of not having to take that tablet each
Mm.
night is such a big thing for me. And 5 months off now, what I started to notice, Billy, was feelings coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah, some nasty feelings, but some really good ones too.
Yeah.
I suddenly, could cry 1 minute and laugh the next.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of dampening the antidepressants gave me. Again, some people just want to do it, and I completely understand that. But for me, actually, being able to feel the full range of my feelings is so important.
Yeah. It's so weird for me because I've never taken them. So
Yeah,
like when people talk about antidepressants, I have this vision in my mind of being like zombies, because that's what, like, I've heard people talk about that.
yeah,
But like I don't know why I've never been tempted. I guess I've heard too many bad stories,
yeah,
and it kind of makes sense. But I do take medication, but I take propranolol. But
yeah.
I
Okay.
have a similar sort of, well, it's a psychological withdrawal thing for me. If
Yeah,
I try and miss a pill, or I'm trying to wean myself off,
yeah,
like, I have the symptoms. I mentioned it on a podcast that I have, like, I can feel my heart racing and stuff like that. But these are things that didn't affect me before I was put on the medication.
yeah,
I was just told, take these, they're going to help.
yeah,
I've been on them for ages, and now when the thought of coming off them gives me anxiety.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Just
it's the mind and body is powerfully
mm,
connected.
mm,
And you know when we use anything as a crutch, when we use a real crutch,
mm-hmm,
if you broke your leg, and went to hospital and they put you in a cast and gave you a crutch, but then your leg healed, but you continued to use the crutch long after your leg had healed.
mm,
When you came not to use the crutch, you wouldn't be able to walk properly.
yeah, yeah, of
Not because there's
course,
anything wrong with your leg anymore, but just because you've depended on
yeah,
something for so long. So, I think it's healthy that people realize that antidepressants and anxiety drugs, they can really help with some difficult
mm,
times, but the best they can do is manage symptoms.
yeah,
The best they can do is damp down the palpitations, or the sweating, or the panic, or the racing thoughts, or whatever else it might be. And I kind of think that we need to try and encourage people to find other therapies that work for them,
yeah,
either alongside the drugs or instead of the drugs.
mm,
And I certainly wouldn't recommend anybody coming off the drugs if they felt they were beneficial to them. It's very much a personal choice. But
yeah. I think the key is information, being
yeah,
informed when you're offered them. Because, like
Yeah.
I say, my experience is just you need to take these. I'd go to the doctor's in a panic, and then he's saying you need to take these. Keep a lid on things. They're going to make you feel better, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, and propranolol has been used for many years, hasn't it? It's I think
Mm,
it's used by concert pianists, among others, to
can't play
dampen down
piano.
stage fright. And
Yeah, yeah,
and certainly drugs have a place, but they're not the only tool
mm,
in the toolbox.
yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so so what I'd like to do now is having kind of discovered tapering strips and got so far with the petition.
Hmm.
My next thing really is to try and make these available on the NHS for
Yeah.
people, so that when you go to your doctor and you might say, I've been on the drugs for a year, actually I feel much better, I want to come off. Or you
Hmm.
might say, I want to try something different, or I might want to try therapy, or a woman might be pregnant and might be worried about the
Hmm.
effect of the antidepressants on her baby. There are many reasons people want to
Yeah.
come off. So what I like to do is for the doctor to go, yep, we can help you. We've got these things called tapering strips, and you and I can sit down together and we can work out a withdrawal schedule that works for you, that takes
Yeah.
into account, are you working, or, have you got specific things going in your life that maybe we might have to pause or slow down or whatever else it might
Hmm.
be. So, so
Whereabouts are we in that process?
So at the kind of back end of last year, I wrote to Matt Hancock,
Hmm.
the health secretary, and I enclosed the petition, and I said, look, while it doesn't affect everyone, there are a large number of people out there who are really struggling with support and guidance, and
Mm.
a practical method of helping them come off. And there are these things called tapering strips. I have this petition signed by 13,500 people, and that letter also went to the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Wendy Byrne, and also to the chair of the Royal College of GPs. And Wendy Byrne, the president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, very graciously wrote back to Matt Hancock and said,
Mhm.
this sounds like an interesting idea. We would support a
Yep.
trial of these strips in the UK. And so in February this year, I found myself in London at the offices of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the head
Mhm.
offices, with Dr. Peter Groot and the chap that runs the pharmacy that produces tapering strips, Paul Harder, he's another doctor, and a psychiatric researcher, Mark Horowitz. And we went to
Brilliant.
meet Wendy Byrne and a representative from the Royal College of GPs to talk about, could we arrange a trial of tapering strips in a few GPs clinics or a
Yeah.
few psychiatric clinics. And it was a very positive meeting. Of
Mhm.
course, I was terrified.
I
I
was
hadn't.
gonna say, how was your anxiety?
It was off the charts completely.
Yeah.
And I'd barely left the house, in so
Mhm.
long, and the
Yeah.
podcast was trying to reach out, and I detested meetings when I was at work anyway. So
Yeah.
to be in the middle of London and with these two Dutch scientists trying to
Mhm.
shepherd them the right way to the meeting on the tube and all the rest of it, it was a real challenge.
But it's
But
testament to your passion for this. Like, that's what I take from that. The fact that you were
it,
prepared to go and do that for this cause.
yeah, it really, when I went to that meeting, every time I struggled, I had the voices of the people in my head saying, I can't get off these drugs, I need
Yeah. Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
And that really motivated me to kind of keep going, even through the very difficult times.
Mhm.
And it was really funny. I've got a 10-year-old daughter, and she came to London with us. And
Mhm.
I'm quite open with her about that. I struggle with anxiety, and I find some
Yeah.
of these things tough, because
Yeah.
I think it's healthy for her to know that
Mhm.
it's normal to struggle with these things. And so she wrote on my hand, "You got this, Daddy," in like biro. And on the tube on the way there, I caught sight of it on my hand, and I felt tears coming to my eyes.
Mhm.
I had to rub it off
Really?
because I thought, if I catch sight of it in the meeting and start
Yeah.
blubbing,
They get
they're
him
all going to
out.
wonder what the hell's going
Yeah.
on. So, but anyway, the meeting was really positive,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, of course, recent events with coronavirus,
Mr.
that is,
Hancock slightly busy.
yeah, that is a far more important issue. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we have to put things in perspective. The medical
Mm.
world is utterly and completely absorbed
Mhm.
on a significant challenge at the moment. So I think things will go quiet, but I'm hopeful for the future that
Yeah.
tapering strips, it's such an obviously simple idea.
Yeah.
It really would not be difficult for us to do. I want people to be able to go to their doctor and get them prescribed.
Mm.
You can get them now in the UK, but it's not easy to do. So It is perfectly legal in the UK currently to import medicines from Europe for personal use. But with tapering strips, you have to go to your doctor. You have to explain the concept to them. The doctor has to sign the prescription form, and you have to pay for them yourself.
Right.
And that's something like 60 to 70 euros per strip at the moment.
Blimey.
They don't make a profit on them. It's a not-for-profit thing. But
Yeah.
of course, a lot of people can't afford that. Understandably, if it's going to take 3, 4, 5 tapering strips maybe to get off, that's quite a lot of money. Whereas, of course, we're used to getting prescriptions free. So my hope for the future is that, firstly, as you so rightly said earlier, Billy, that doctors give proper informed consent. And they say, yes, I can prescribe this antidepressant to you, and we'll closely monitor you to see how you get on. But just be aware that some, not all, but some people might have a tough time when they come to get off at the end. However, we have things in place now to help you with those difficult times in the form of tapering strips or liquids or whatever else it might be. So I think if we can have that discussion up front, that really better prepares people for, because a difficult withdrawal experience might undo any of the good work that's been done by
the problem,
taking.
isn't it? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you're using them along with like CBT or counselling, and then when you think you're making progress, and then you're like, okay, I'll stop the antidepressants, and then boom, that wave comes back, and it can't be a good experience.
No, it's for a lot of people, it's deeply upsetting.
Yeah.
And they do get lost in if they've been told they've got a chemical imbalance or they've got a genetic propensity or all these other things that there's not much evidence for. If they're told those things, they think, oh, well, I obviously need the drugs. I'm obviously feeling ill because I've relapsed into an illness. Whereas what you want to say to people is, your body has adapted over many months or years to the presence of this drug, and it's tried to compensate. It's tried to compensate as best it can for the changes that the drug's made in your system. And when you take the drug away, those adaptations are still there, but they're not compensated for by the presence of the drug. So, and this is another thing that you'll hear doctors say is that, oh, it can't be withdrawal because you've stopped the drugs out of your system.
Right.
Now, that I think displays a very simplistic understanding, if an understanding at all, of how these kind of, these drugs do change your body.
Yeah.
Your body makes adaptations to them in exactly the same way that if somebody were to drink heavily for 10 years, if you suddenly took their alcohol away from them overnight or very quickly, you would expect them to be in a very difficult position.
Yeah, of course.
Because their body has adapted to the presence of the drug and adapted to processing it and dealing with it. So, again, I think doctors need to understand that taking these drugs for a period of time, the body tries to adapt the best it can. And it's those adaptations that create withdrawal effects when you come off. So I think, we shouldn't be saying to people you've relapsed unless it can be proven that someone's relapsed. It's just as likely to be an effect of coming off the drugs.
So can you see any reasons or stumbling blocks as to why they wouldn't proceed with the tapering kits? Is there anything springs to mind, like cost or?
Well, there's still a battle at the moment to get withdrawal recognised.
Okay. So that's the first.
And I have to say, Billy, being able to chat to you is really important for that. Being able to get this on the Victoria Derbyshire show the other day and to have a podcast about it and for people to share their experiences. If you go on social media and you search for antidepressant withdrawal, you will see quite quickly people sharing their experiences.
Yeah.
And sometimes doctors will say, "Oh, well, that's just anecdote. It's not real data." But it is real data. It's real people.
You can't get any more real than real people.
Absolutely. So it's all well and good to do a clinical study on these drugs, but that's it's artificially done. It's not in the real world. Once you put these drugs in the real world and allow people to use them and then come off them, that's such valuable feedback for either someone to say, "Actually, I came off them no problem," or for someone to say, I had the most awful time and I need to tell people about it. So progress is being made with that because more professionals are speaking out. The Royal College of Psychiatrists have acknowledged that withdrawal is a problem for some people and they are writing some further guidance on it. Part of the issue is that, so when you go to your doctor and say to them, I want to come off antidepressants, they look at the NICE guidance.
Right.
NICE is the National Institute for Clinical and Health Excellence. I think that's right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and in their guidance, if you look at it at the moment, it says withdrawal is usually a mild self-limiting thing over 1 to 2 weeks.
Right. Okay.
And a group of academics challenged that statement actually, and asked for the evidence supporting that statement, and
Mhm.
it came out there wasn't any.
Oh.
There wasn't any actual
Okay.
evidence supporting that
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm not suggesting it's a conspiracy, but it certainly is a minimizing of people's experiences.
So has it been changed?
Yes, it has been updated
Okay.
this year, and the guidance will be more substantially updated by 2021. But now
Right.
in that guidance, it says some people may experience withdrawal effects for much longer than this.
Mhm.
So at least now a doctor looking at the guidance can think, oh, okay, well, maybe maybe what this patient is telling me is true, and they are one of these people that will have a more difficult time. So progress is being made. You asked about barriers. Obviously accepting withdrawal experiences is the first one, and we're charging at that barrier as hard as we can. Number two is cost. Of course, we do need to worry about costs because the NHS is under pressure. Some antidepressants are ridiculously cheap, of the order of £2 or something for a month's course of the tablets. Tapering strips, yes, they're more expensive to prescribe than that, but what we need to bear in mind is that there's some evidence that people taking antidepressants long term might get some longer term health complications from that. So,
which is going to cost more.
Yeah, absolutely. During me taking Mirtazapine, I put on weight like there's no tomorrow. Still haven't got rid of it, as people can plainly see. But Mirtazapine made me want to eat like crazy. And people do put weight on it. And of course, if you put on weight, then you're more at risk for diabetes and all those kind of things. So there are longer term health implications of taking these drugs that could cost the NHS a great deal more, that we might avoid if we spent a bit of money getting people off more safely.
Plus, if they choose to then start taking diazepam to help with the withdrawals, and just this leads to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I quite how long it will be, Billy, honestly, I've no idea. Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years, but there will come a point where a gradual tapering method will just be seen as the default. And we will look back, and doctors will look back and say, oh,
why didn't we
really take these people off these drugs in a week or a month even? A lot of people need 3 months, 6 months, sometimes years. I am one of those people that needed years to come off, and that was the quickest that I couldn't have gone any quicker.
So do you think that doctors sometimes give them out a bit too easily? Do you think, because you hear that so often, like, I don't know, like you hear that doctors make money from prescribing antidepressants and stuff? Like, do you know the truth?
Well, yeah, I think, if you look at the United States, then, pharmaceutical companies are allowed to advertise on television. They are allowed to send drug reps into doctors' surgeries, and all that kind of stuff. So the situation in the US is, the pharmaceuticals have huge influence. It's less so in the UK. So, a doctor doesn't, as far as I'm aware, a doctor's salary or performance or whatever doesn't rely on the amounts of certain types of drugs that he prescribes. But having said that, the pharmaceuticals can influence the NHS buying procedures.
Yeah, of course.
So, and like you, I've heard that antidepressants are prescribed too often.
Just everyone.
I have to say, the statistics do bear that out. So NICE every year publish the statistics on how many antidepressants were prescribed. It was 70.9 million antidepressants prescribed in 2019. Now that's the total number of prescribed, so obviously that's not a course, that's just an individual antidepressant prescribed. And 70.9 million is the number, and that excludes hospitals, private psychiatric clinics, and prisons. So that's just prescribed at the doctors or through community pharmacies, and that number has doubled in 10 years. So
is that worldwide?
There are pretty similar increases elsewhere, not everywhere. I was just reading this morning, actually, that in Denmark, actually, because of a concerted campaign to promote therapies for anxiety and depression, the number of antidepressants prescribed has decreased. That's one of the few places in the world. And, if you look at it at face value, you can see the attraction of prescribing an antidepressant. It's relatively quick, it's relatively easy to do, it's relatively cheap. And I do feel for doctors in this. If I was a doctor,
our hands are tied, aren't they? Essentially, really.
Yeah. If I was a doctor and I'd got somebody in front of me absolutely in bits, who can't work, can't leave their house, can't enjoy life with their family, I would desperately want to help that
Yeah.
person. And I look at the referral screen and it says, CBT is 6 months away,
Yeah.
9
That's the
months away.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think doctors are genuinely trying to do the best they can.
Mm-hmm.
I think antidepressants are, you know, I just think we need to be a bit more cautious about either how quickly they're prescribed in the first place or how long people are left on them.
Mm.
You know,
But I wonder what doctors are told, like in training, or like you say in the guidelines, it said that
yeah,
people might struggle for 1 to 2 weeks. So if they're ill-informed in the first place,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think much more honesty is needed in the
mm,
conversation about how safe and efficacious these drugs are.
mm,
And there was an interesting event kind of last year where I don't have the details on me, but a very large study of antidepressants was done, what's called a meta-analysis,
right,
and a meta-analysis looks at many studies of many randomized controlled trials of the drugs being used to see if they were efficacious. And this study was done. It was very complicated. It took a long time. And when the study was released, I think it was summer last year, the media headlines about it were, one paper said more people should take antidepressants, but the
right,
media were largely saying antidepressants work, we should stop worrying about them.
mm-hmm,
So I kind of read these news articles and I thought, I wonder what the study itself actually says. And so I went and read the whole study.
mm-hmm,
And if you read the whole study, it's really modest about its conclusions. It says for some people, antidepressants might be slightly more efficacious than placebo.
mm-hmm.
So that isn't saying they're magically effective for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah,
They
yeah,
do work for some people, but for a lot of people, they don't actually feel that much difference. But of course, what that ignores is the fact that, if with placebo, you don't get adverse effects. You don't
mm-hmm,
get the risk of withdrawal. You don't get the risk of feeling tied psychologically to the drugs, for
yeah,
many years.
yeah,
So, if these drugs were the most efficacious drugs on the planet and everybody benefited from them, I could see the argument for just prescribing them straight away without really thinking
mm-hmm,
too much
mm-hmm,
about it. But the performance in studies doesn't really bear that out.
yeah,
They are a little bit more efficacious than placebo. So, what I say to people is, if you're really in a hellish place and really struggling, then try them. But if you don't feel much different, don't stay on them for too long.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I think what we're doing that's a bit dangerous is we're saying 6 weeks to have any effect at all, and then try them for another month, and then we'll put the dosage
mm,
up to see if that helps, and
yeah,
then we'll put you on an antipsychotic as well, or we'll add a benzo on top of it as well.
mm,
So it's this cascade, I think, that's getting people trapped.
mm,
So I would like to see more informed consent at the point of discussion with your doctor about what the future might hold.
mm-hmm,
And I'd like to see more reviews for people where, if someone says to the doctor, as I did to my psychiatrist at 6 weeks, I said, I'm not enjoying being on these drugs.
yeah,
I want people not to be pushed to stay on them.
mm.
That if they've made a decision themselves, they want to try something else, they should be allowed to do that.
They should be helped. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Johan Hari?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
am.
yeah, because he's
Yeah.
got some interesting work out there with
Yeah.
regards
Yeah.
to antidepressants.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was fortunate enough to get to talk to him
Oh,
and
seriously? I've been
yeah,
reaching
yeah.
out to the bugger. He never gets back to me.
I'll see if I can put you in touch.
Perfect.
He had a very similar experience. Kind of feeling trapped on the drugs and feeling awful when he came off, and then, like me, went off on a bit of a journey to go. And I mean,
Yeah.
he's a proper journalist, unlike me. I'm just an average Joe, but he flew around the world and talked to
Hmm.
people about it. And we I think as a society, we've kind of romanticized the idea of these drugs.
Yeah.
We've put a lot on them to help people, and there are a small group of people, I think, who may need to take some psychiatric drug, maybe for life, who
Hmm.
whose lives are unbearable without it. Um, but as for medicating someone that's gone in and saying, I've just lost my partner, or I've just been made redundant, or one of these horrible things that happens to
Yeah.
people, that's not an illness.
Mm.
That's someone, and in that case, a doctor should be saying, look, you could try one of these drugs, but it's only ever going to treat your symptoms.
Hmm.
It's not fixing a chemical imbalance. It's not correcting anything wrong in your brain.
Yeah.
What you're displaying is a human reaction to some really,
Hmm.
really
Hmm.
difficult, nasty times.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of good could be done from us, exactly as you're doing with your podcast, is just an open and honest discussion
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. Interesting. I mean, I've got no more questions. Because my knowledge of antidepressants is just so lame. But that's
Well,
why you're here.
well, it's a very interesting area to look into,
Mm,
and I think this is an area where you don't have to be a medical expert at all to go off and read some of this stuff. There are some really good, really accessible
yeah.
books. So,
Yeah.
Irving Kirsch wrote a book called The Emperor's New Drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one I'd recommend people to read. It's really good about the accuracy of the trials that are run on these drugs, and how good they are, and whether they are efficacious, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. So I'd recommend people read that if they're interested. Taking people's accounts online is really important too.
I've just thought of
And
a really good question. Like,
okay.
journalist. No,
Yep.
I don't know. I was just thinking, like, if a family member of yours
Yep.
develops anxiety, depression, and they said to you, I'm thinking of taking antidepressants,
Yep.
how would you feel about it? Would you back them to take them, or would you say, let's just try and figure this out?
Well, I try and avoid advising people because I'm not a doctor. I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
medically
yeah.
qualified in any way. I if it were a member of my own family, I wouldn't want to stop anybody trying something that might help them,
Mm,
but I think I would very clearly try and explain to them the limitations of the drugs.
yeah,
That
yeah.
they can only ever treat your symptoms. They're not fixing anything. They're not curing anything. You know, are you happy to rely on just treating symptoms for the rest of your life? Because maybe that's not letting you get to the core issues. And
And that answer right there is exactly what we want doctors to say to people when
yeah,
they ask the question.
yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
I wonder whether you know I wonder whether in the future, actually going to your GP is the right thing to do at all if you have kind of mental distress or emotional
Mm,
disturbance. I wonder if
mm,
the GP now, of course, the model that we have in the UK is you go to your GP for anything from a migraine
yeah, yeah.
to, sadness to, redundancy, or,
Mm-hmm.
so many things we go to our GP. But I wonder if in future GPs might have, emotional support clinics where you go and talk to somebody who's not a general practitioner first
Mm,
to assess your kind of emotional and psychological needs. And then they might only refer people on then to the GP if they think this person does need medication based treatment. The other people, they might be saying, well, let's have a peer group, let's
mm-hmm.
sit together with a bit like, you do with your community.
Mm,
There's so much value from people sitting in a room together and discussing their experiences and thinking, oh, God,
yeah.
I'm not alone. I'm not unusual. Loads of
Mm-hmm.
people are
Mm-hmm.
struggling with this. So, and of course I have to think about it with my own daughter. What if my daughter
Mm,
struggled, or, suddenly, develops an eating disorder or whatever, I'd be really torn because I would want the best help available for her.
mm,
But I think I would want an honest discussion about the limitations of medication based treatment
yeah.
for anxiety and depression and other things. And,
Mm,
I don't know for certain. And if people wanted to try it, I'd say absolutely, they're chemical molecules that you can try, but just recognize if they're not helping you and then put in a plan to do something different
mm,
if that's
mm.
the case.
Perfect. I think we about covered it.
Great. Well, Billy, it's so good to get to talk to you about these
I know,
things.
yeah.
And
It's like I say, it's been a long time. So where can people find your podcast?
so yeah, if they go to the website letstalkwithdrawal.com, it's all on there, and there's a link to the podcast there. There's a few blogs and things I've written about this. We've just put up the video of the kind of Victoria Derbyshire piece that was
Yeah,
on the other day.
that's what I
And
seen.
yeah, and that's interesting because it shows a support group for people
Hmm.
struggling with withdrawal. So they're sat together talking about it, because isolation is a big part of this.
Yeah.
And people can listen to the podcast there and stuff. And also, if people want to visit the website madinamerica.com,
Hmm.
and kind of having done my own podcast for a while, I came to interview someone called Robert Whitaker. And so, some of your listeners might know the name. Robert Whitaker is a science journalist who wrote a book called Anatomy of an Epidemic, which is another
Okay.
one that people should consider reading. And it's really brilliant on, are we overdiagnosing and over treating people with, emotional distress? And I came to interview him,
Hmm.
and it kind of transpired that Mad in America wanted to do their own podcast. So I
Right.
started to work with them on that. So that's another really good website to visit because it gives the alternative perspective. So, you can go off and read the medical literature about, are antidepressants effective, but also you can go to sites like madinamerica.com and you can read real people's experiences, and
Yeah.
you can read psychologists saying maybe there are other ways to do this. So, I recommend that. And of course, the videos that you do, Billy, are just brilliant. I think it's so powerful to share your
Appreciate
experiences and your journey and the community that you've built up over the last 5 years or so. Is it?
I think we're just 6 years now. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, well, I think your work is so valuable, and I'm so
Thank you.
delighted to have got a chance to.
I'm enjoying
to
this.
chat with
I'm
you.
enjoying doing these podcasts because I'm learning. Like,
Yeah,
hence the name, The Breakdown. Like breaking down this stuff because like there's things that I don't know about, and that's where you come in. So.
Well, it's a two-way street. I learn loads from watching your videos, and from listening to Cole and to Drew, and I think the podcast is going to do really well, and I'm just delighted to have been able to talk about it.
Yeah, and don't forget the petition. We'll stick a link. Yeah, we'll stick a link to that in the description.
Yeah, great. I'll drop you a link to it.
And that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for joining us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Billy.
You're welcome. And we'll see you on the next one.